let's start out with this. The war hysteria, the propaganda in the US, the EU, and NATO is on steroids. I have never seen anything like it in my 77 years. Have you seen anything like this?
No, I mean, I have lived through several periods of extreme demonization of, of foes, real or imagined. I mean, during the Cold War, we demonized the Soviet Union. We accused the Soviets of all sorts of sins, some real, some imagined, and yet, we were able to conclude, arms control treaties with them. Ronald Reagan, who was the man who coined the evil empire concept, suddenly in June of 1988 is meeting with Soviet university students, answering questions and saying, "I no longer view you as the enemy." So we overcame that. In the buildup to the war in Iraq, Saddam Hussein became the personification of evil, even though a decade before he was a close ally of the United States. The Iraqi people, by extension, became dehumanized because, we can't go to war and kill people that we view as human beings. So we dehumanize the Iraqi people. But we had a long and incomplete and difficult rehabilitation, I should say, through our occupation of Iraq. I think many American service members who served in Iraq came to view the Iraqi people as I understand them, as human beings, fellow human beings who have the same, wants, desires, aspirations, etc. So, we have done this, but what's going on right now, we're not talking about an enemy. I mean, Russia, we've called them an adversary, but the notion of Russia as an enemy of the United States is just an absurdity. It's an invention of the media and some extreme elements in the government. But even if they were our enemy, the fact that we've turned the Russians into sort of the modern day equivalent of lepers. I mean, if you're a Russian today, you're not allowed to do anything. You can't perform in an orchestra. You can't conduct an orchestra. You can't play sports. You can't travel. You can't breathe, apparently. So no, we're in a period of extreme demonization. The problem with that is this is the point in time where we actually need to have our thinking caps on. This is where we actually have to start, engaging in informed discussion, debate, dialogue about, what's really going on with Russia. I'm not sitting here trying to whitewash everything the Russian government's done or the policies they've embarked on. But what I will say is that they aren't black and white. And that if we want to find a solution, there's that old saying, in order to solve a problem, you first have to accurately define the problem. Because if you haven't defined the problem, what you're seeking to solve isn't a problem. You're solving nothing. If we claim we want to find a way out of a potential World War III or even a conventional conflict, or just to end this ridiculous decoupling that's taking place right now by Russia from the West, we need to define what the problem is. What is it we want to solve? How will we go about solving it? In order to do that, we need to have an accurate appraisal of what's going on in Russia. And right now, you can't get that. The moment you say anything that remotely sounds like you're supportive of a Russian position, you're called a Putin stooge. You're pro-Russian, which apparently is evil now, as opposed to being pro-Ukrainian, which is good, which is ironic because the Ukrainians, have incorporated this neo-Nazi ideology that we went to war to eradicate several decades ago, and suddenly now it's okay to be neo-Nazi, or we just pretend they don't exist because we hate the Russians more. So no, we're living through a sort of a unique time in post World War II history.
Well, we're going to get to this question about Nazis in Ukraine in just a bit, but what drives me crazy, Scott, is everybody in the West, everybody I know in America are saying this is Putin's war. And they've demonized this man to no end. And I'd like to make the point, I'd like your comment. This is no more Putin's war than it is Joe Biden's war. I mean, Putin, for one, is not a dictator. I know that. I live here. he has a Security Council, he has the military, he has a lot of other powerful forces who are the ones who constructed this military strategy to intervene in Ukraine to liberate it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it just, if you call this Putin's war, and if you speak about this solely in the terms of the Russian president, all you're doing is underscoring how much ignorance you have about Russia and how Russia operates. Let's not make any pretense, however. Vladimir Putin has been ruling for 22 years. And because he's been ruling consistently for 22 years, most of that time as president, there was a period where he was prime minister, but he still was there making a, I don't want to pretend that suddenly he gave Dmitry Medvedev total control of Russia. He didn't. But there's a couple of factors at play here. One, people say, well, see, he's a dictator because he's been in power so long. But that ignores the fact that you can't entrust true democracy to a system that has been corrupted by outside influence. So people say, well, why doesn't he let so-and-so run, or why doesn't he do this? First of all, he does let people run. If you're a legitimate Russian opposition figure, Zhirinovsky, whether you agree with him or not, he runs. He gets a significant percentage of the vote. But he's pure Russian. There's no CIA funding, MI6 funding, National Endowment for Democracy funding, George Soros funding there. Boom. You can't, as a Russian leader, and I would say that any Russian leader would do this, who took over for Boris Yeltsin. I mean, Americans have forgotten what it was like in the 1990s. I don't think Russians have forgotten about it. I don't think Russians have forgotten about the horrific reality of Boris Yeltsin, a man who, basically sold out to the Americans, allowed Western carpetbaggers to come into Russia to take over the Russian economy, empowered the oligarchs. Today, everybody's screaming oligarchs, oligarchs, oligarchy. The oligarchs came to power under Boris Yeltsin with the encouragement of the United States for the plundering of the Russian economy. Boris Yeltsin was humiliated by his so-called American friend, Bill Clinton. The National Security Archives have published the phone calls of Yeltsin and Clinton. They're humiliating to read. If you're somebody who knows anything about Russia and you read this, you realize just how awful these calls were. And the final years of the phone calls, there's a name in terms of the Russians who were listening in down there. The name's Vladimir Putin. Putin had to sit there and watch his president be debased by an American president. So Putin came in and said, never again. And that doesn't mean that he wanted to be dictator. I don't know the man personally, but I've listened to him speak. And I actually believe that Vladimir Putin would prefer to be in retirement in Crimea on the beach at Yalta, enjoying the sun, than he would be in this horrible job of being president of Russia. But he can't. Who is he supposed to turn the reins of power over to? The processes of democracy have been so corrupted by outside influence that before this can happen, Putin has to cleanse it. And he's in the process of cleansing Russia of the taint of Western interference. But now we have a president who's been in power for 22 years. Imagine how comfortable he is in this position. Imagine how knowledgeable he is about everything that deals with this position. So the fact that he functions far more efficiently than his Western counterparts is deemed by the West as proof that he's a dictator. No, it's proof that he's been in power for 22 years and he knows how things work. One thing he knows is that Russia is not a dictatorship. I mean, he knows this because he's the executive. He knows what the limits of his authority is. He knows that Russia is a huge country. Russia, many time zones, many competing interests, and its complexities, that if you're going to make a policy, you have to start at the bottom with a civil service class of highly educated bureaucrats who know all the nuts and bolts, work it out, coordinate with other bureaucracies to come up with a consolidated policy position, which is then subjected to review by senior elements in his staff who brief him, and then he, together with them, make decisions based upon what people have said. He's not a dictator. He doesn't sit at the top and wake up in the morning and go, I decide we do X. That's not how Russia works. So anybody who says this is Putin's war or this is all about Putin, they literally lack any fundamental knowledge about how Russia works today.